This is my current company champion. However, I think I need a bit of an upgrade. For the base of the company champion, I used the Emperor's champion from Black Templars, but I don't have his arm, and I also don't have his head, unfortunately, because it's second hand, but I do have the body. This is what it's looking like. I've got all the bits, he's been primed already, but I can still fix him. Company agent has a sword, and I want the sword to be here. So I started to dry fit a few arms, such as his 3D printed bow pistol and a blade guard, and that looked perfect. So I started to dry fit some different weapons, and I had this flaming sword, and I just knew what I wanted to do. I then started to cut the sword off the hilt, make sure not to cut the hand and only the sword. Careful not to cut yourself, because don't be a muppet. And this is what it looks like. And I did the same to the power hand, cutting off the sword off the hand, so then I could do this after I file it. Give it a nice little file just so it can attach properly. And this is dry fitting. I'm cutting off some of the shoulder pad so I can get my 3D printed ones onto it. And here's one on the left arm, looking quite snazzy. And a shield I'm going to use. I'm going to cut off the hand grip and blue tack it on for a little bit of a dry fit onto the left arm as well. And now I'm going to dry fit some heads. Got the company ancient one, which looks good but won't taste. A Mark 8, a Mark 4, and some Grey Tide Studio heads. I knew this is the one I'm going to pick. I added some chains onto the sword hand to cover up some sins I did. Made some bit of green stuff up, and green stuffed everything together. The head, the arm, as well as the shield. Added a bit of chains to the shield. And I added a little hammer onto his waist belt. Make sure to smooth it out. Started to fire his knee so I could make a flat surface for this skull motif that I'm going to glue onto his knee. And this is what it looks like, quite snazzy I would say. But we're not done yet. On this little piece of green stuff I made, I used a dragon toy and then used that to make my template, and I now am smoothing some green stuff onto it, make sure to use lots of water to get the texture, and then I'm cutting it up afterwards, after making sure I do it properly, because clearly I didn't. Make sure to use lots of pressure and lots of water so it doesn't stick. And then get it off the brush and start cutting it up and put it onto the shield. Make sure to pull and twist it and cut it up a bit more, just so it looks a bit more rugged and used, as I can imagine this guy's a bit old, fighting for a long time for the salamanders. And I put him on a bit of cork, 2 layers of cork, and I'm going to put a bit of PVA glue on and put him into the sand mix I have, which is very old random bits. There's even glass in there and it works like a charm. Dust it off, and this is the result of the build. And now all we gotta do is prime and paint it. But before we do, let's have a nice little look around. Here we have the piece of green stuff on the back of the shield, the backpack that we have still intact, the arm and some sins I had to hide with the chain. After priming the miniature black, I used 2 base coats of Caliban green. I used a heavy dry brush, as you can see here, and just made sure to get all the armour plates, and if it went anywhere else I wasn't too bothered. I then did the same with Warpstone Glow, allowing it to go on the arm panels, and if they didn't get in the recesses it was okay, as the Caliban green would create shadows, same with the dark primer. I then moved on to Moot Green, doing the highlights where the light would hit the most on the arm panels, using a light dry brush and just doing it repeatedly in the same area got the effect I wanted. This is what it looks like after all the armour has been painted and all done. and it looks quite snazzy if you ask me. I then moved on to the scales, where I based it with corn red. We're using 2 coats on all the bits I wanted to be red, which are the scales for the most part. I then moved to Mephiston red, where I dry brushed over the previous corn red. Next, a light dry brush of Evil Sun Scarlet over the scales. Next, a shade of Druchy Violet all over the scales that we did previously. Then, another light dry brush of Evil Sun Scarlet over the scales, just to enhance it slightly more. Then, I will use Abaddon Black on all the armour that needs to be black, which are the shoulder pads, the backpack, and the bits in between the armour, as well as any cloth, such as the one on his chest. I then use a dry brush of Eshin Grey over the black armour parts, such as the backpack and the other black parts mentioned previously. I then repeat the step with Dawnstone, just using less paint on the brush overall. Lastly, for the black armour, we did the same thing as last, but with Ulfin Grey, again using less pigment than the last 2 steps. For all the gold parts, I used Retributor armour on all the little gold details, such as the belt buckle as well as the faceplate. I then gave the gold 2 shades of Violent Flesh Shade, so did it once, let it dry, then repeated it again. I then used a coat of Adrax Agaton over the previously done gold. I then highlight the gold with Retributor armour, kind of like an edge highlight on all the places where the light would hit. I repeat this step with Stormhold Silver, covering less than I did with the Retributor armour. I then use Lead Belcher on all the metal parts, such as the chains, the sword, and any other accessories. I then use Tamiya Clay Red on anywhere that I wanted the gems, and it gives a really nice effect, especially on the shoulder pads. It looks like very realistic gems. I then use Druchy Violet over all the metal, such as the sword and chains, just to add some more colour variation and shade the recesses. I then use a coat XV88 on anywhere I wanted to be parchment or bone, such as this knee accessory and the horns. I then use 2 coats of Ustashi bone over the areas I wanted to do bone and parchment again. Not too worried about getting all the areas, as the XV88 should help cover any mistakes. I then use Seraphim Sepia over the spawn area, and it looks very nice, as you can clearly see. It adds more of a dark, dirty colour to it, and it helps a lot. I then used Adrax Agaton over all the parchment, so this big part on the back was the main area. I then used Vallejo model colour Cold Air on the flames, as well as any other white details, such as the little salamander symbol on the shield and shoulder pad. For just the white details, such as the salamander symbol, I used the contrast paint Apothecary White over it. I used Bad Moon Yellow contrast paint over all the white areas that are going to have flames or any glow, such as the sword blade. Afterwards, I made it orange with Flasket Yellow and Evil Sun Scarlet, and started to dry brush it over the flames, leaving some of the orange in the recesses and at the start/source of the flame. Using Mephiston Red, I did the same step, however covering less area as last time. I do this step again, however I use Corn Red, and just like before, covering less area than I did previously. The last step for the flames is Abaddon Black, mostly just covering the edges, however letting some overlap in some areas. I then used a little pen, which is a fine liner, on the parchment to add the writing. I find it a bit easier than using a brush, and it looks a lot better. I went back to the green armour and did the edge highlight of Moot Green. I was a bit confused if I wanted to at first, however, as I started to finish the model, I realised I probably should do it, so I did. This is him all done, however I think he needs to be base first. Let's go to the results. This is the finished result. I'm very happy with it, and I hope that you enjoyed watching the video, the building process as well as the painting. If you did, I would love for you to put any feedback in the comments, like and subscribe, and with that, have a good day.